Welcome, chat, to Late Night EU Top 8. My name is Vic, and I am joined yet again for the second time by Voiddyn. Hello, Voiddyn, how are you doing? Paradox Rift is super sick. Let me make sure that you're coming through all right. You might be getting drowned out by the music. So chat, let me know if you can hear Voiddyn okay, if the sound is coming through, if the sound balance is coming through. But while we're setting that up, while you let us know, our matches are getting ready to be played. We have quite an exciting lineup for you. Lots of cool decks to enjoy in this new Paradox Rift format. Okay, we're saying no Voiddyn audio. Darn it. Sorry. Thank you, chat, for your patience. 1 second. All right, can you test for chat? Snorlax stall is in our top 8, and it is pretty neat. It is pretty cool. It has a lot of, well, it's a variant that we've seen for a while now, but it does have the addition of Counter Catcher, which is obviously a huge, massive buff to the deck, where you don't have to support her for turn every time or flip a coin to get that gust going. So, oh, we still have no audio. Darn it. One more try. I think I know why. One more. This, add this. Okay, try.
Okay, check 2, 3, check.
Okay, that I think should work now.
Okay.
Cool.
Hopefully I'm coming through one way or another, right? When it comes down to it.
Yes, I believe it's working now. Thankfully.
Awesome.
So we have a couple matchups that are already being ready to be streamed. A couple people in our voice channels. Do you have a preference? I guess it does seem like our number 1 seed is ready to go to be streamed. So I guess we probably should stream him. He is playing Koichi Kimura from Japan, is playing a cool Gardevoir list. We were talking about this right before we went live. Do you want to mention what we saw?
Oh my gosh, there's so many cool things in this list, right? So like we see like the Scream Tail in the list coming in. I love how, like, you know, right before we were talking about the Scream Tail, which has the Roaring Scream attack, right? It deals 20 more to one of your opponent's Pokemon for each damage counter on this Pokemon. So you kind of get to like really get that like crucial snipe that, like, you know, Guardio's always looking for, right? I feel like that was one of the advantages that Guardio didn't have in this format. We also have, let's see, I'm trying to see if there was anything like else huge. I know we were talking about the Averys being played because now, you know, people have to respect the Scream Tail. Just overall, I feel like that everything coming in here is just like, you get like Luxurious Cape as well, right? You get that extra 100 HP boost. All of this is like, there's so many cool cards coming into Gardevoir. Gardevoir looking to be one of those like staple decks of the format. Counter Catcher comes into play to, you know, like being able to just pull things forward. All fantastic stuff.
Let's see if Koichi is going to be, actually went off the voice call channel, so maybe not. Maybe we won't see that matchup, but either way, we will have something for you. The other match that we were talking about, Ethan playing that Snorlax stall, is ready for us to stream, but maybe we'll catch him a little bit later on in the bracket if we can see someone else first. And I believe Sympho, I don't know who that is, but let me check on. Looks like Liu and Takumi cannot stream.
Yeah. I mean, look, if we have to ride Snorlax stall this whole entire way, oh, we will.
Yes.
I just hope you guys like seeing Snorlax a lot, and a lot of us, you know, kind of just trying to find conversations to talk about while it's a pass-go type situation here.
Sorry, chat, while we figure out who exactly we are streaming. I believe the 2 people in our channels aren't live yet, but let's go ahead and check on them. I can only see the previews right now in Discord, so bear with us for a second, chat, while we tune into their streams and see what's going on. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the stream, chat. We are here with our first seeded matchup in the EU late night. It is that Gardevoir deck piloted by Koichi that we were talking about a little bit before. It is exciting. Unfortunately, though, for Abbott, they did start Lumineon, not your ideal start, and the matchup is Gardevoir versus Roaring Moon, a brand new deck out of the Paradox Rift format, a super hyped one too. Voiddyn, have you seen Roaring Moon yet this week so far?
I'll tell you that every time that I see it on ladder, it's everybody showing up with their all golden Roaring Moons. And every time I see it, I go, man, this card can't be good. And then they constantly prove me wrong.
It is a very powerful card. Of course, it does have a setback, but even though it does do a ton of damage to itself, it can take a knockout on literally anything. Very, very powerful attack, and it has a second attack too, which is almost just as useful, if not more so, especially in this matchup where Gardevoir EX is weak to Dark. But even though this deck has to fight an uphill battle against weakness, I think the fact that Gardevoir has single prize options makes it pretty balanced, maybe even Gardevoir favored. Have you played this matchup specifically at all, Voiddyn?
Yeah, and every time that I played this matchup, besides me constantly misplaying and going, oh, I have a stadium in my hand, I should probably play it down,
yeah,
right, and losing because of that, when I did play, the general guarding matchup, I always felt very strong in just saying, look, I'm going to try to not prize, or I'm going to try to not play 2 prize cards on the bench at all. I'm going to try to make sure that there's nothing for them to bring up. I'm going to make sure that I don't get into this awkward situation if I don't have to. And Gardevoir EX only comes down as soon as I can attack.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense as a game plan for the Gardevoir deck. You can use Gardevoir EX. You can touch a bunch of energies the turn you play it, and even if they go chase it down, you still should have a bunch of energies in play, so you don't need to play it down again the next following turn. You can just attack with whatever you set up the previous turn. So it makes a lot of sense. We see Abbott squawk and seize and set up 1 dark energy onto that Roaring Moon. They did go first. I'm not sure who chose to go first. I imagine the Gardevoir deck actually chose to go second to kind of slow down the Roaring Moon, get at least 1 turn off without an attack happening. But the interesting thing we did talk about in the pre-show about Screamtail, and I think it's super relevant in this matchup, no mana fee in the Roaring Moon deck, so it should make your prize route just a little bit easier. Do you think, with all these techs that Gardevoir has, do you think it's favorable for Gardevoir, or do you feel like it's pretty even, or what's your take on that?
I think it's going to be pretty even, right? If the Roaring Moon player knows to kind of just try to target out and boss up those big guys, right? I think the Roaring Moon deck is going to be fine, right? The fact that these stadiums are going to come down, you're going to get your ramp via your dark patches, all this quick energy attachment, with 1 prize attackers, you may not even use Roaring Moon's first attack. It's such a liability to use the Roaring Moon's first attack that you may just try to get that second attack off as much as possible to KO whatever you can, especially with the weakness.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think this Gardevoir list is super interesting because the Screamtail is very useful in this matchup, but something that actually is to the Gardevoir player's detriment is the heavy Avery count. There's 3 copies of Avery in this deck list, and it's really strong against some of Gardevoir's unfortunate matchups, like the Chen Pao matchup, for example. They want to keep Baxcalibur, they want to keep a barrel, they want to keep Greninja, they want to keep Manaphy to protect their stuff from Screamtail. They can't do it all at the same time under threat of Avery. Whereas this Roaring Moon deck, though, if you Avery them, they're just going to get rid of their Squawk, they're going to get rid of their Luminion. So that actually is an interaction that's kind of interesting, and we'll have to see how it plays out.
I wonder in that case, you know, you may just play it anyway to draw cards.
Right.
I think it's going to be on a case-by-case situation.
Yep.
Right.
For sure. So we see the escape rope coming through, Mew being sent back, being pushed back into the Ralts, and this is actually really good for Abbott, clearing up one of the 2 Ralts on that first attacking turn, making it just a little bit harder for Koichi to bounce back.
Now, I wonder if you're in this situation, right? You know, you kind of look at your opponent's deck, you're thinking, do I give up the Manaphy, right? Is it ever worth it? I know the Radiant Greninja's there. My opponent's playing Water Energies, right? So I have to respect the Radiant Greninja. But part of me is going, maybe it's a risk that I need to take to get double setup, right? I mean, maybe it's different if, you know, if the Gardevoir player has a rare candy in hand, can evolve up quickly, can get all this stuff started. But either way, I feel like it's rough, and there's no good choice.
Yeah, there is something to be said about getting rid of that Manaphy, especially because you do have Super Rod in hand, so you could get it back the turn after. I guess you are worried that the Radiant Greninja play could happen this turn, especially with no energy switch being shown, or 1 energy switch being shown in the discard, so it would have been possible. And you could lose on the spot instantly the next turn if you don't get it back, but it makes sense if you're worried about that Greninja play, for sure. As we see that knockout onto the Ralts doing more than enough damage, doing 440 thanks to weakness, using that Calamity Storm attack and discarding that Pokestop, which is also an interesting choice to discard it. Not necessary, but maybe hoping that the lack of Pokestop helps brick their opponent just a little bit further.
And that's the thing, right? Like, no matter what the Guardy player brings up, right, it's gonna get knocked out. You assume whatever's getting thrown up there, there's no chance that anything lives. Everything's a liability here. It's just pacing. Sometimes you want to put stuff on the bench just to be able to get, you know, escape roped up. Anything that you can do to stall is probably the best play here.
We do see Koichi top deck that Ultra Ball, discard a Refinement Kirlia off of it, and you might be wondering, like, why would you discard a Kirlia? It's so important. And actually that's precisely why you would, because we're seeing that Mirage Step come through, Super Rod it back into the deck, Mirage Step, the Kirlia is back out, and even though Koichi's board got a little bit disrupted thanks to that escape rope, we're going to be back in line. We're going to have a strong board of 3 Kirlias to try and bounce back from this prize deficit.
And that's such a cool thing about the Mirage Step Kirlia, right? Like, you know, no matter what happens, right, you could see that you know, they were on such a back foot, right? You know, they were trying to just set up, do anything that they could. The Mirage Step kind of just instantly got them back in there. They don't have to worry about putting something in the active right now. If they get escape rope or anything else, they have plenty on the bench to feed for prizes. And, you know, they're just going to have to hope that they can catch up to this constant prize struggle.
Something I will say is that Koichi's board is really strong with 3 Kirlias, 1 Ralts, 1 Manaphy to protect against that wacky Greninja play that Abbott could make. But even though the board is strong, the hand is pretty weak. No supporter. Gardevoir EX is probably a necessity if you want to take a knockout next turn. But only 2 cards in hand, and you kind of need a lot more than that, hoping to draw into an Iono probably the next turn.
Right, and that's the thing, right? Like, you know, what's the thing that wins games most of all? It's how many cards you see, how many times you go through all of your draws, right? You know, we're going to see this Kirlia refinements, hoping and praying that something comes out, but, you know, if there's still a whole bunch of variants, there's 38 cards in the deck, we may not see an Iono whatsoever.
Abbott takes another knockout with that Calamity Storm. After a bunch playing down Vitality, Dark Patch, his board is also fully set up 2 Roaring Moons with more than enough energy to attack. Actually, one of them having 4 to prepare for potentially a Greninja play if this Manaphy ever gets knocked out or ever gets sent up as a sacrifice. Or even maybe just using that 90 damage to the active as a 1 prize attacker could be an option as well. The Guardy player has comeback routes. It's not over yet. Even down 4-6, still very, very winnable. Just kind of depends on what they draw here. And they do draw into that Avery we were talking about, but you don't really want to play it this turn because you want to be able to snipe off those Squawks and Luminions.
So I guess, the play here might be to counter catcher up, the Radiant Greninja or the Squawk ability or something that you want to stay on the bench, and then Avery, hoping that some good value gets taken out here.
Yeah, I think this play makes a ton of sense because you do want to keep at least one of these low HP 2 prizers on the board for your Screamtail to take out later on in the game. Sometimes a Roaring Moon can be kind of tough for the Screamtail to get through. And in this case, it does work out. The Avery does draw into some cards, does disrupt your opponent a little bit. They did have to get rid of their free retreat pivot. Unfortunately, though, we also saw Koichi discard the Gardevoir EX off of one of their first choices, not having that many resources to work with, opting to choose that counter catcher, which means we might not get an attack here this turn at all.
And after a certain point, right, even with so many attacks, once Koichi's opponent goes down to like 3 or 2 prizes, it's going to be a very difficult game, even more than it is already. Because once you get past that 1 prize parity or any advantage that 1 prize attackers have, and you set that game clock, you have to hope that you draw amazing and you stall them out of certain situations.
Right.
But looking at their opponent with 4 cards in deck, a huge hand.
4
right?
cards in deck.
Like, what can you even expect?
I think there is a magic number here for the Gardevoir player. If your opponent's at 3 prizes and the Gardevoir player's at 6, there's still a chance you can go 2-2-2 and win the game before your opponent can go down to 0 if they have no Gust, no way to take 2 prizes in a single turn. So the game isn't completely over, but I agree, it's not looking great because you can't really disrupt your opponent anymore. There's just too many energy on the board.
And if I'm the Roaring Moon player, right, I don't play anything else. I just keep both Roaring Moons out, and then as soon as something looks like they're in trouble, right, they only bench as needed.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah.
Unfortunately, I think this Mew is a goner ASAP. Not even close.
Koichi going in, taking the knockout onto the Mew, going down to 3 prizes. This is the final chance. We have to make something happen here. If you're the Gardevoir player, if you're a Gardevoir fan, there has to be a knockout this turn.
And even the Iono won't even feel good here, right? Because, maybe you're going for Iono just to get something, right? To be able to get rid of your opponent's cards out of their hand, right? But at the same time, you have that reversal energy in hand. You have, that boss's orders in hand. You're just, at a situation where you really don't want to get rid of anything that's in here.
Yeah, it's tough, for sure. And I actually think maybe, remember that counter catcher play onto the Luminion? I think maybe that actually should have been counter catcher under Squawk ability, because Screamtail does cap at 160 damage unless you play a tool card. And we do play tool cards to buff its HP, but the one that Koichi does play is Luxurious Cape, which would not be good in this case because it gives your opponent an additional prize card. So if Squawk was still on the bench instead of this Luminion, that would be something that you could play for.
And even here, right, you have that Fog Crystal counter catcher Ultra Ball. It's so close to being perfect. But getting rid of those Refinement Curlias is such a hard thing to do here. Because you don't want to lose the draw, especially when you're this behind on prizes, and you want to take any advantage you can. But I guess when you gotta attack, you gotta attack, right?
Yeah, I don't know. We see Koichi bring up the Ralt and attach the reversal energy to the Ralt, but that does mean he needs to find rare candy here, and there is no rare candy, which means there will be no attack. So at this point, the best he can do is I guess counter catcher and stall and hope that your opponent doesn't have access to any more energies.
Right, especially because most of the cards are on the bottom, right? So, but again, even throughout all this, you're like, okay, what do I put up, right? I guess I put up a Ralt. I want to hold on to this reversal energy, but 6 prizes to 2 prizes next turn,
I guess
you're in a real rough position.
yeah, it's tough. I guess the best win condition you have at this point is hope that your opponent is super out of resources and you can just knock out both these Roaring Moons and just hope that your opponent can't ever set up a third attacker. I think that is the plan currently. I think Abbott knows that that's the plan, knows that that's basically the only lose condition that he has, and sets up another Roaring Moon. 0 cards in hand now, but we'll get to draw some thanks to taking some knockouts, thanks to these prize cards.
I don't even know if playing the Roaring Moon was the correct play there, because, you know, giving something else that does not have an attachment on it or any energy
Right.
at all on it, right? I feel like that's just setting up for your own downfall.
It could
If
get
Koichi comes back
countercatcher
here.
stalled.
Yeah, if it's just so rough.
So here, I guess the win condition here is you countercatcher, bring up the Roaring Moon with no energy, and then you just start scream tailing the bench turn after turn after turn. I think that could potentially win you the game, especially given that your opponent only has a 1-card hand. It's possible. We do see a rare
Never
Candy
say never, right?
and Avery as well, but I think you want to countercatcher
Yeah, you want to countercatcher
first.
if you even want to Avery at all, right? I guess you're trying to Avery for a Gardevoir EX, but
Right. Yeah, Avery for Gardevoir EX, I think makes sense if you can find it, but doesn't find it just yet. Going to have to shuffle 1 Gardevoir EX back in with that Super Rod. Your opponent can't win yet next turn, so you can still do that Scream Tail play we've been talking about. I think this goes back to what you were saying before, Voiddyn, where you said you wouldn't want to bench anything unless you started feeling the pressure, started feeling the threat of your Roaring Moons getting knocked out, and I think this does leave a window open. Actually, now with that Ralts benched, now you don't have any way to target the bench anymore unless something gets knocked out, which I guess it will next turn, so you can take a knockout here. There's Gardevoir
EX.
The double reversal energy Brainwave doing 240. A perfect knockout, as perfect as you can get with that Brainwave, with those Brainwave numbers. So we are going to get 1 Roaring Moon knockout here, and then you can potentially knock out another, and hopefully you've stranded your opponent from having the resources to set up a third attacker, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the coolest things about this deck, right? Koichi definitely risked it. And I think at that point, you might as well, right? Like, are you going to go in, and try to, like, force your opponent to react? Or are you going to, sit there and play it safe? And I guess if you're Koichi here, you're like, look, I'm going to lose anyway if I don't do something. So I might as well just go all out and, load everything up here, make my opponent misplay, go for the best draws. And they did it. They got there, kind of, almost.
It's coming down to the wire. We see Abbott actually discarding a switch card off of those trekking shoes, which means that boss stall, the countercatcher stall play we were talking about, wouldn't have worked really. So Abbott still in place, still in a good spot, but having to use that frenzied gouging instead of that Calamity Storm, because this baby Gardevoir does not have Darkness Weakness, there is no Stadium in play, does mean that this will get Revenge KO'd super easily. Only 2 cards left in hand. Might even Iono that to 1 potentially.
Right, and the only risk that I think that Koichi has by Ionoing here is showing one of those cards that guaranteed to be put into the bottom, right? If there was something very good there, but at the same time, if there was something very good there, they would have seen it anyway, right?
Yes.
We're kind of at this situation. It's a do or die.
We are going to see that Iono, like we talked about, putting your opponent down from 2 cards to just 1. You can knock out this Roaring Moon. We do know that there's Vitality back in the deck, so you do have some time. If you bring up this Greninja, you do have an opportunity to set that Vitality play up, to set up another Roaring Moon. It's going to come down to what that Iono draw to 1 was.
And that's always the best games, right? Where you go, okay, did my opponent hit the thing off the Iono, right? Did my opponent have it?
I think it is a core strategy for this Gardevoir deck. If you're a fan of that game plan, definitely check out Gardevoir for sure.
And honestly, I'm very disappointed in Koichi. Koichi chose to discard the full Art Iono instead of discarding the normal Art Iono. I think that's a very bad play in my opinion. But then again, that's just me, a humble, full art enjoyer myself.
We do see the countercatcher play now. The Screamtail play that we were talking about before is going to happen this turn, where we bring up this Roaring Moon, and actually this decreases the odds greatly of the comeback, of the win, actually, the closing out the game for Abbott, because now you can't Dark Patch this active Roaring Moon. You kind of need a combination of cards that may not even exist for Abbott, and we also see that Luxurious Cape being played down onto the Screamtail, which does mean we are reaching 190 health, which means this Screamtail can do potentially up to 360 damage. Not going to quite get there this turn, but can do so next turn to close out the game.
And that's such a cool idea, right? Like the fact that Screamtails are really stepping up to the plate. You're using the cape at a certain point, right? This is something that I think a lot of people misplay, where they play the cape early because they're like, I don't want my really good Pokemon to get knocked out. Cape comes down when it doesn't matter anymore, right? Cape comes down when you're just like, look, I need to hit a certain number, and it doesn't matter if I give my opponent an extra prize because they will win anyway.
Right. It's a super cool card because in conjunction with the Screamtail's attack, it essentially acts as a damage modifier, taking Screamtail's max damage from 160 snipe to 360 snipe if you're able to put 9 energy onto it, putting it at 180 damage, and you get to do 20 damage per damage counter, of course, which means that Screamtail is ready and raring to go to knock out this Roaring Moon for the end of the game. And suddenly a game that we said was looking very in favor of Abbott is looking like it might be swinging in the opposite direction.
And the really cool thing about this too is that I remember back when Gardevoir was talking about possibly running that Drifloon, the one that kind of acts exactly like Screamtail, except Screamtail gets to hit any Pokemon, right, as well as having more HP and just overall seeming like a better play. So I think, like you said, we're seeing the Screamtail come in to go for the knockout, and it's going to be huge overall.
Koichi retreating the Manaphy, Abbott making the last potential win condition play he had by bossing up that Manaphy, hoping it got stalled out in the active, but Koichi had one more energy to be able to retreat it, and now we see 7 energies being attached onto the Screamtail, doing more than enough damage to this Roaring Moon to take the last 2 prizes, and suddenly the 3 prize to 6 prize comeback has been completed. 2 prize knockout after 2 prize knockout after 2 prize knockout does mean that Koichi will win game 1 of the set and will move on to 1-0, just needs one more to secure his spot in top 4.
And that's, again, this is very astounding, right? Because we came from a position that we thought that Guardy had very little to no chance, right? And the fact that Guardy's coming back and doing the thing just always feels good. It always feels good whenever you can come back, especially in weakness.
I do think that maybe there could have been some option for Abbott to set up a 3rd Roaring Moon earlier in the game. We did see, that one bench Roaring Moon with 4 energies on it. We saw the Radiant Greninja with 1 energy on it, right? Maybe those energies could have been allocated a little bit differently had he made different choices. Obviously, Avery would have made it annoying to keep a 2nd Roaring Moon on the bench, but maybe there was something that could have been done here, and we'll see how he adapts. Maybe that will change moving forward.
And that's one of the just overall, like, Guardy's such a cool deck. I will come out and I will praise Guardy every single time, right? I love Gardevoir. I love to see it in play because when it's played skillfully, you get these really awesome and unique games and stuff that we're sitting here and we're going, well, I personally wouldn't do that, and you see it pay off and you're just sitting there and you're just like cheering in the background. You're like, this is so cool.
It is very cool, and I do like this build a lot. I do like the idea of the Averys plus the Screamtail. It reminds me a lot of a deck that I used to enjoy very much so, Urshifu Inteleon with Avery. This was pre-rotation, of course, with scoop up nets and that shitty dealings about a year ago, or maybe 2 years ago at this point. But you would use Avery to kind of put pressure on your opponent because they would want Dunsparce, they would want Manaphy on their bench, they would want all these cards to protect their board, but using Avery forces them to kind of pick and choose what they need on the board, and then you punish it with sniping capability. And I think Gardevoir is a great way to showcase that same strategy in our current standard format.
And it makes me wonder if we're going to see people start playing 2 copies of Screamtail, if they're going to be playing 3 copies of Avery, to kind of just like boost up this strategy of saying, you know, I'm not going to accidentally prize my Screamtail, we're going to get through, we're going to do this. But the problem with Gardevoir is that you only really have that one flex spot for Pokemon.
Yeah, I think actually some would argue that you don't have any flex spot because Koichi actually cut Cresselia from their deck to make room for that Screamtail, and that's probably a pretty contentious cut because I think a lot of people would argue that Cresselia is one of the best attackers that Gardevoir has access to. In this case, though, Koichi says, "Nah, I think my Screamtail is enough," and I think there are definitely upsides to the Screamtail. Of course, it can knock out those baby Pokemon V very easily, like the Squawk ability. Could potentially knock out Lumineon or Roaring Moon with the addition of that luxurious cape. But there's also downsides. It doesn't get through Manaphy the same way Cresselia does, so maybe we might see lists that play both in the future.
And the deck list is so tight as it is, right? Yeah. Anything you cut, you just go, man, am I ruining my engine? Am I not playing these cool utility Pokemon? Right? As we saw earlier, it was so hard for Koichi to set up at certain points. You were just like, come on, you're so close. You almost have this, right?
Koichi actually only plays 3 VIP Pass to make room for 4th level ball, but it's paying off huge here because we do see VIP Pass in the hand, turn 1 already. And interestingly enough, Abbott chooses to go first in this matchup, which I think makes sense because you kind of want to guarantee that attack as soon as possible. You don't necessarily need to attack turn 1 if you think your opponent can't make that much use out of their supporter for turn on their turn 1. We'll see if it pays off as we see Koichi use that Mysterious Tail to grab an Ultra Ball for next turn.
And that's the thing, right? Like, if you look at Koichi's hand is very much like I'm going to get set up next turn, good luck trying to stop me. Mm-hmm. I think if Abbott didn't have a good hand previously, Koichi's going to try to dominate this game. But I was wrong last game, and I gladly will be wrong this game to see Roaring Moon do its thing.
I do think this matchup, basically last game was kind of the perfect situation for Roaring Moon to be able to close it out, and it wasn't able to, unfortunately, because the lack of resources to have that third attacker available. In this match, I think it's kind of the opposite, where this is the perfect game for Gardevoir to win. 4 routes on the bench, 2 Curlias in hand already. You may not even need a Mirage Step, especially given that you have that Rare Candy Gardevoir EX. You might just be able to start swinging right out of the gate. Rare Candy Gardevoir EX, Reversal Energy. Maybe if you find another Rare Candy, you can start attacking with that Baby Guardy potentially.
And honestly, like, you know, I'm still sticking by what I said last game, right? It's all about setting up your bench and making sure you don't prize anything that you don't need in that moment, right? So Gardevoir EX needs to come down only when you're getting those energies out of the discard, only when you're getting ready for a knockout right away. It's such a liability. And, I mean, that's how all these big prize attackers are, too, right? Like, when you're playing against Charizard, you want to do the same thing. Right? So, Koichi's probably not really afraid of anything that's coming down here because it's nothing new in these matchups, right? It's just a different face.
Something that could be interesting is if we do see some single prize attacker get weaved in somehow this turn. Ideally the Greninja, of course, but that kind of is pretty difficult to do given that you can't attach a water energy from the discard pile like you with Dark Patch. You could only use Vitality to do so, and there are no water energy on the board right now. So right now, Abbott is going to have to be satisfied with a knockout on a Ralts instead, thanks to that escape rope. But I think Koichi is pretty happy with where the board is right now.
See, I will say this, though. If I was Abbott, I'd consider possibly using Morpeko as my attacker here.
Morpeko.
Right? Get on the one prize attack train. Because Morpeko being that thing that you just set up and you're like, look, you know, I'm going to get a knockout on everything but a Gardevoir EX. right? Well, maybe not Baby Gardevoir, because Baby Gardevoir
Right.
has no dark weakness. But, you know, like, it's still such a good attacker. And giving one prize, Abbott giving one prize will not change the game really that
Yep.
much.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. I think Morpeko is pretty valuable in this matchup. We might see it come down later in the game if we see a Gardevoir damage itself, for example. That is one chance for the Morpeko to come through. Greninja also still an option given that there is no Manaphy yet. So let's see if that actually comes up. There's only 2 water energy in Abbott's deck, so it'll be hard to do so, but definitely an option that he has access to. And I think you're right. I think we probably won't see the Gardevoir EX come down this turn, but we will see it starting to get prepped for the following turn.
And one of the things that we don't talk about with Mirage Step that's barely ever used for, but, you know, it's a good thing to talk about here, is that you can always use it, like, with Super Rod and rebuild your bench after it getting knocked out, right?
Yep.
That's one thing that a lot of people don't use it for because, you know, it's a very rare situation. But think about how good that is. You know, you get your, you know, you have to discard your Curlias, or, you know, you get a whole bunch of your Curlias knocked out. You just Super Rod them back in. You get, you know, Mirage Step Curlia, act like nothing ever really happened. So
Yeah, we see 3 Curlias on the bench, 1 in the active. Your board state is pretty ideal at this point. I think Abbott will have to fight an uphill battle for sure, even though he's going to be ahead on the prize race, 4-6. The power of those single prize attackers cannot be understated, and I think as long as Koichi can secure that 2 prize knockout the next turn, which he should be able to given the Reversal Energy Ultra Ball Gardevoir EX combo in his hand, it's looking pretty good for our Gardevoir player.
And that's one of those things, right? You know, Gardevoir is one of those decks that if you know, again, this is always player skill level, and I will always say that, right? If you know what you're doing and you know how to claw your way back up, you'll get there, right? You have the resources. Refinement is one of the strongest skills on a Pokemon right now, or one of the best abilities on a Pokemon right now, right? Being able to refine these dead cards away. Battle VIP Pass isn't a problem when you can just discard it. You know, and like Level Ball, who needs that right now? I'd rather draw 2 more cards. There was a reason why Zoroark GX was one of the strongest cards in the format.
That is true. We do see the refinement coming through. Koichi counting the energies to make sure that we can get a knockout this turn. I think it is crucial being able to. We see the Avery just to draw some more cards. No bench effect, but sometimes a vanilla draw 3 can get you there. And I didn't get to see how many energy are in the discard, but I have to imagine it's enough.
And I mean, you know, I think Koichi wouldn't be this confident in their decisions if there wasn't a knockout coming down this turn.
Looks like 6
Yeah,
psychic
6
energy, which is plenty, especially if you want to include that reversal energy. Actually, you would have enough to knock out even a VMAX at this point. But don't quite need to. Just need to get that regular KO onto this 230 HP Roaring Moon EX. Should be pretty easy and should set Koichi off to a great start. Tying up the prize race this early on in the game means wonders for this Gardevoir deck.
You know, friends and I constantly joke around about how they just keep printing Gardevoir cards, and I think Counter Catcher is definitely a Gardevoir card. It's like, how did they not just expect it to slot straight into the Gardevoir deck?
Maybe they have,
It's
and
like the perfect pair.
Yeah, I think it's really strong, and even without the Moonlit Hill that Japan has access to right now, Gardevoir showing its strength in our EU late night today. Going to be able to get this knockout, potentially even without the reversal energy.
And honestly, you know, Gardevoir can always make the distance, right? You know, it's kind of sad that reversal energy will get turned off by this KO, but honestly, I'd rather reversal energy get turned off to a certain extent, right? You just go, hey, look, who cares? Right? You know, I would rather take the KO and move on, and then reversal energy can come down when I need to have a backup later.
We do see the reversal energy come through. I don't think it's a huge deal for it to come down now versus later. I I'd have to think about it, whether or not which option is optimal. But either way, you do get the knockout here. Abbott will be forced to respond, and I think even if things go swimmingly for Abbott and they're able to chain attackers back to back to back, the prize race is looking in favor of Koichi right now, even if they're able to get an attack off this turn, and they might not even be able to. Only 5 cards in hand. Let's see if they can get there.
I feel like the only way Abbott comes back is using Radiant Greninja attack
Right.
this turn. And it's not coming down this turn, I don't believe. I don't believe we have the ability to put down 2 water onto the bench.
One option, it's possible thanks to a combination of using Vitality to attach water and Energy Switch and then attach water from hand and whatnot. But it would require a little bit too much, and I think we're going to see a regular attack come through from Roaring Moon instead. And I think it would be okay if you could knock out a Gardevoir EX this turn as well, take 2 prizes that way, but I don't think that's happening either. Just not enough resources in hand for Abbott to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think there's just too much going on. And I think Koichi's like, yeah, you knock out my Gardevoir EX, who cares? I got 2 prizes for your 1 prize, and all those energies are just going to come straight back.
Yeah, it's tough. You would basically have to take 2 prizes followed by 2 prizes at this point, and this Roaring Moon deck normally doesn't play any sort of disruption, so I think this Gardevoir player, Koichi, is going to roll with it and just kind of close this one out. Looking at the list, yeah, Abbott doesn't play any copies of Iono or Roxanne or anything like that, just the 4 Sada and the 1 Boss's Orders. So unless Koichi mismanages their resources, attaches too many energies, benches something like that Radiant Greninja, and gets rid of all of their retreating options, it's looking like a pretty good situation for Gardevoir to close this one out.
And honestly, one of the strongest things decks can do in the format is just, respond to your opponent's super large hand with an Iono, right? It's, normally people would say back in the day it was Reset Stamp, it was Judge, etc., but being able to lock those cards on the bottom of your opponent's deck is so huge, especially with so much search and everything going on, and saying, look, you have a 10 card hand. Those are 10 cards that you're not seeing unless you shuffle.
Roaring Moon does trade some of that late game hand disruption power for its early game strength, and I think we're seeing why, even though there is weakness for Gardevoir EX to have to fight through, the single prize options that it has make this matchup feel very, very reasonable, maybe even favorable for the Gardevoir player, and we are seeing that in action here. Just too annoying to get through these Pokemon that only give up 1 prize but can still knock out your 2 prizers.
The more I think about it, the more I just go, man, I came into this being a non-believer, right? And looking at Koichi play this list, I'm just immediately like, man, maybe Gardevoir can do it all.
Time to bust out the Screamtail. Seems like it. Screamtail coming down onto the bench, but yeah, Gardevoir EX finding a footing in the metagame. People were a little bit worried that it wouldn't be able to hold on. Too much Chien-Pao in the format, too much Iron Hands in the format, and while they are certainly annoying to deal with, sometimes players can adapt and sometimes they can find different ways to build a deck to be able to counter those things, and I think this Avery Screamtail counter actually is built to beat Iron Hands in Chien-Pao, and I'm excited to see how it does later on in the tournament if it ever runs into that sort of deck.
And if we keep the diversity and health of the previous format, right? Like we had talked about last stream that we were on for the last tournament, we can really get to the point where we're just like, look, maybe you just let someone else deal with that matchup.
That's true.
Right? Something in the format, unless that the deck is dominant, right? Something else will prey upon it. Something else will be the answer to it.
Pass on over to Abbott's turn after taking a knockout with that Brainwave. Just 2 prizes left. Boss's Orders in hand already as well, so no stalling with Morpeko shenanigans, and you can't disrupt that hand in any way, so the knockout is going to come through one way or another. Not to mention the Luxurious Cape also available, so you might not even need that Boss's Orders. You can just use that Screamtail to take the knockout as well. Multiple different ways to close out the game for Koichi, showcasing the power of Gardevoir deck, bringing it overseas from Japan. Can't bring the Moonlit Hill, but doesn't matter. Still going to walk away from this best of 3 with a 2-0 victory potentially, unless something extravagantly catastrophic happens.
And that's kind of the strength of Gardevoir, right? It's not any individual card that is strong. It's all the cards together that are strong, right? It's having access to the Shining Arcana Gardevoir. It's Gardevoir EX. It's Refinement Curlias. This deck has so many pillars holding it up and just making it a solid deck, right? That people can just innovate. People can do more with it. I mean, there was a time where people were playing Shining Arcana as engines for other decks.
Mm-hmm.
They never really made it that far, but people definitely got some really kooky things happening. All these cards are just very strong on their own, and coming together, they make this like ideal list.
Gardevoir is definitely one of the Pokemon Company's favorites. Historically in the Pokemon TCG, these Stage 2 decks, normally not too strong, unless we're talking about the era of pre-nerf Rare Candy, but in recent years, Stage 2 decks typically are weaker than their big basic counterparts, but thanks to that powerful Stage 1, like we were mentioning, that powerful refinement ability, it really breathes life into a Stage 2 attacker deck, as we see Koichi take the win, as we were mentioning. That prize race, just too good, trades too well into the Roaring Moons, taking their last 2 prizes and moving on to top 4.
You know, it's kind of great how, you know, we saw all these like Stage 2 decks kind of stepping up and really growing. When I had started the game coming into it competitively, it was right when Forest of Giant Plants was huge. And people would come in, and then it got phased out and whatnot.
Yeah.
You know, it's great to see Stage 2s actually get a chance. And, you know, we have stuff that just lets it, you know, fight against all these other lists, especially like Charizard and other stuff too. Overall, I think we're just in a very... I will gush about the standard format even now. It's fantastic.
I'm excited to see what will happen at LAIC. I am going next week, so fingers crossed I can find a good play, find a deck that I like, and do well with it. But super exciting, and this is kind of our first look, our first sneak peek into what might show up there here at Late Night, and lots of people showing up. Over 200 players in both EU and NA, so lots of players trying to get last minute practice in, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't in this tournament setting. But I think that wraps it up for our featured top 8 match. I don't think there are any being streamed right now, but we are waiting for one still to finish before top 4. Any last thoughts or words, Voiddyn, before we take a break here?
I think that Koichi played this fantastic, and I'm glad I was wrong. Every time that I see Gardevoir do great, I am so happy.
Koichi going to try and take it all, moving on to top 4. Still 2 more best of 3s, but has a good chance. I like the list a lot. I think it has a lot of potential. Let's see how it goes. But in the meantime, while we get our competitors to get ready, while they get set up, while they get their streams going, let's take a quick break. We'll see you back in just a few. Welcome back, chat, to top 4 of the EU late night. We are watching Koichi yet again, facing off against Vinny Fernandez with... I actually forget the matchup. Let's look with Goldango. We were just talking about it off stream for a sec. Goldango with Revavroom. An interesting matchup for sure. What do you think of this one? Have you seen a bunch of Goldango on the ladder so far, Voiddyn?
I played a bunch of Goldango on the ladder, and every time I play Goldango on the ladder, it's a mirror match. So, it always feels bad. I will say, with how I predicted last time, anytime that I make a decision here and I say, I think this person's going to beat this other person, the person that I bet against has always shown me wrong, and it's been fantastic games. So I'm not a Goldango believer. I will say that. I think the deck's really rad, and I think the deck does its stuff. But I think if you're playing well, you could probably play around it. So, and by play around it, I mean save your Ionos, right?
Right.
So I'm crossing my fingers that that Goldango doesn't become a thing. But if it does become a thing, at least we get to have fun while we play it.
I think out of all the Goldango list there are, Vinny's list with the 2 Revavroom from Scarlet Violet base is a little bit more resilient to that Iono. All you need to do is draw into 1 energy and suddenly your hand is back full to 6 cards. That being said though, there are no alternate attackers in this deck. You can only attack with that Goldango, so he might run into the same issue that we saw last match where these 2 prizers just cannot keep up with the 1 prizers, knocking them out again and again and again.
And isn't that a lot of the Goldango lists, I believe, are playing Caesar?
Right.
If I'm not wrong. And Caesar's really good into the Gardevoir matchup, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to play it because you can kind of throw a wrench in your opponent's plans. You can prevent them from going 2-2-2. You stall the game out by 1 additional turn, and they can't even boss around it, even if they draw into their Gus at the right time, because you can just choose not to evolve into your Goldango EXs and just leave your board with only those gimme ghouls. That's not going to be an option for War Expert here. Vinny Fernandez with only the metal energies, nothing like a reversal energy, nothing like a Scizor to be able to attack with anything else, just the Goldango. It's going to be a very straightforward list, a very consistent list, and I think that's what got him this far. That's why he's 11-2-2 on the day, just not maybe prepared for this matchup where you're expecting single prizers to knock you out again and again and again.
But like you said, right, consistency is key with a lot of stuff in Pokemon. There's a reason why when certain decks are so tight, you cut a card that you think is really good for another card that can go into that slot. Mm-hmm. Because you want to make sure that all of your cards are hits, right? You want to make sure that, your Gimme Ghouls can evolve into Goldangos. You get everything set up. Vinny gets to take advantage of the Technical Machine evolution, right? When that comes down, they're going to guarantee that they get a hit, right? There's no question to it. The deck is very consistent. Consistency is key. I'd rather have a weaker deck that is consistent than a strong deck that is very inconsistent.
Yeah, I think at this point, a lot of the lists are going to be focusing on making sure that their core strategy happens consistently more often than not. And I think that's kind of what Vinny's list aims to do. And sometimes you just have to take those bad matchups here and there. Actually, Vinny is 11-2-2, but one of his losses so far this tournament was to Koichi previously on the day in round 12. Let's see if Koichi can do the same, and I think it's looking so good already. Having 4 Kirlias and a Ralts on board, no prizes having been taken for either player. It's looking really solid.
Right, and this is one of those things that, do you wish you had the Scizor? Yes. Is it going to be game-changing? Who knows, right?
Yeah.
We can't really make that call here. Maybe we'll sit here and we'll be like, look, you're staring down a Gardevoir EX that you can't knock out, or, something else that you can't knock out, but Goldango does a lot of work.
There is an element to your tech cards. Potentially, you could play them to make your matchup a little bit better, but if you lose it anyways, it doesn't really make a difference how close you were to winning, right? If you're going to lose it anyways, you might as well try and increase your matchups elsewhere.
And that's one of those things, right? What prizes matter? Your last 2 prizes, right? when you're down on 2 prizes or your opponent's down on 2 prizes, if you knock out the EX, it gets you the win. It doesn't matter if they took 4 prizes or they took 5 prizes, right? It's the last prize that always matters.
We do see Goldengo coming in, taking a knockout here onto that Mirage Sepcurlia. We have 3 refinements and a Mysterious Tail to work with. Let's see what Koichi can draw here. What attack are you expecting Koichi to bust out this turn, if any?
Man, if Koichi has to attack this turn, because I'm thinking, like, what do you attack into Goldengo with? If I were to attack into Goldengo, who has just as much draw as I do, right? Think about these Goldengos. Not only are they attackers, they draw you a ton of cards too. I feel like I would probably just do a normal Shining Arcana Gardevoir attack. Right? You take advantage of that reversal energy, get that off the board ASAP. Right? If you could get it off the board ASAP, you'll be fine.
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense here. If Koichi can get that Shining Arcana and knockout, which looks more and more possible by the minute as we see the refinement come down, the Shining Arcana come down, 2 more refinements left to go, reversal energy in hand, Gardevoir EX in hand as well. I don't know how many energies are in the discard. I think that is the key factor here. We have to see a certain amount to be able to take the knockout here.
Oh my gosh, it's so weird, right? Because I think I'm gonna if I had to give Koichi advice, right? Not telling Koichi how to play, because Koichi has been fantastic. But if I have to give Koichi advice, it's never put out a Gardevoir EX until you need it. And that might just be the format now. It may not be no more early Gardevoir EXs. You could do everything else. But, Gardevoir EX only comes out if you're stuck.
I think that might be what we're seeing with only 3 energies in the discard pile. Will we see the Gardevoir EX? 3 plus 3 does get you to 240, so not quite enough to knock out this Goldengo just yet. Oh, we do have the Mew having the Psychic Energy on the active, so that's why we see the rare candy come down, because there will be a knockout this turn. 4 Psychic in the discard, plus a reversal gets you to 7 energy, which will take a knockout here.
Now, there is an argument somewhere down the line that how many energy can the Goldengo player get into hand, right? Like, can Gardevoir EX is very chunky, right? 310, that's what, 6 energy that need to be, or 7 energy that need to go to hand to get that 1-hit knockout. So, even though you don't want to give it up, there is maybe a line somewhere that a cape goes onto a Gardevoir EX and it just sits there and it fronts and hits a bunch of stuff.
I think in this case, the Gardevoir EX coming down is alright, because if Vinny does get the boss KO onto the Gardevoir EX, which will be a tough task, a tall order in it of its own, but even if you do, you then still have to deal with this baby Gardevoir that's taking a knockout on your Goldengo yet again. So I think this play makes a lot of sense. As long as you can keep up this 2-2-2 strategy going, this Gardevoir deck should have no problems. As we see Ultra Ball away, 2 cards for that Revavroom. The Revavroom engine probably pretty good against Gardevoir in general, thanks to those Ionos disrupting your hand. You get to refill your hand when it gets low. Unfortunately, those Averys have wreaked some havoc onto Vinny's board, already having to discard a Mew and a Manaphy thanks to 2 Averys back to back. So gonna be tough. We might not even see a knockout at all this turn, but even knocking out just the baby Gardevoir, I don't think that's enough to win the game, and I think Vinny agrees. We don't see an attack and he will just concede, and Gardevoir, people thought it might die thanks to Iron Hands, but nope, it is thriving. 1-0 on the set in our top 4.
Well, and that's one of the things, right? We talk about this all the time. Gardevoir will fall apart due to Iron Hands, but Iron Hands has to make it to top 4 first.
That's true.
Right? You could have a very good matchup in one way or the other, but if it's not topping, you're not going to see it, right? So, just to make sure that your pairings never include Iron Hands and your Golden as Gardevoir.
Now that you mention it, looking at the match schedule for Koichi today, did not play against any Chen Pao, even though he was actually very prepared for it thanks to those triple Averys. Did hit some Rhydons, did hit 2, and one of them did win against, and one of them did lose against, actually the very first round of the tournament. But yeah, I think, like you were saying, if you don't hit the Iron Hands and you have like some options into it, like we were saying, the Avery Screamtail combo against Qianpao, you should be pretty okay with how strong Gardevoir is into the rest of the field, and we're seeing that now. Koichi has been smooth sailing through top 8 and potentially even top 4.
And looking at the standings too, while they get set up, I see a lot of good old reliables in there that I thought that would get phased out eventually by these new cards. But like Mew Genesect is still a thing. Giratina Lost Zone box is still in the top. Like where yes, Roaring Moon stood, got into top 8, was doing really well. But like the good cards are still good, right? It takes a lot for someone to break into top 8 to kind of get there.
Koichi showing off the strength of Gardevoir. I wonder if this strong showing will mean that LAIC Gardevoir decks will be inspired by Avery and Screamtail combination to counter some of those decks that want to set up wide, to make the setup a little bit more difficult, to disrupt the boards of their opponents. And I think with LAIC coming up next week, a lot of international top players from around the world are preparing, but maybe not showing off their full strength, not showing off all their little secrets and techs. But Koichi is from Japan, who has, and they have a completely different circuit than we do. Most likely not going to be competing in LAIC because you don't really get any benefit from doing so. So maybe this is Koichi's best deck he has available to him, and is showing the world how strong it is with and basically holding nothing back.
Well, and it's one of those things that like in Koichi going this route, these cards have already existed, and this is almost you see the staggering of metas. Decks that do really well in Japan and over there in that circuit may not do well over in the NA circuit and things of the sort, because there's different playstyles, people like different decks, people prioritize different things in playstyles, right? Because of this, you see people all the time, they grab a list that did fantastic in the Japan, but it never makes top 8. You see it played every once in a while, right? That's because we have radically different playstyles and the pacing that cards come out.
Yeah, I think Moonlit Hill is an example of a card that makes Gardevoir even stronger over in Japan, but still strong enough here, as it seems, as we pass on over to Vinny. Draws for turn, uses that concealed cards. Will we see a knockout this turn? This Screamtail not weak to metal, but still should be a pretty easy knockout for Goldango to get if we do see Goldango being the attacker this turn, or we might just see TM Evolution be the play instead.
I will say this, like looking at Koichi's list, the biggest cut from the list, I think, is that we're not seeing the Zacian V in the list at all.
Oh, that's right. No Zacian V. I totally missed that, given that I was already hyper focused on no Cresselia, to be frank.
And that's the thing, right? That card you see come down so often and seems to always be a liability. It's just, you're at the point where you're like, man, is it good enough in this meta? Do we need a 2-prize attacker? Maybe we're seeing Gardevoir take that, that clear, hole left in the meta that needed more 1-prize attackers. Gardevoir could be that deck.
You know what's funny? In this deck, it does seem like Screamtail is your pseudo 2-prize attacker, right? Because if you include that Luxurious Cape, it is a 2-prize Pokemon that can hit huge numbers, can hit up to that 360 number that you want Zacian to hit. So I guess that makes sense. It checks out that Screamtail can kind of do the role of Cresselia and Zacian if you include that cape. Obviously, there are some downsides, like you have to find the cape first, which isn't maybe the easiest to do, but it checks out. The theory holds, I guess.
And it's kind of great that you see so much confidence in this Gardevoir list, right? That there's no Lost Vacuum in the list, right? You're not using Lost Vacuum to get rid of the cape. You're not using Lost Vacuum to get rid of, Path to the Peak, any weird or problematic cards that could come up, or Collapse Stadium, right? You're just saying, look, I'm going to just deal with these punches as it comes out. I know to use my resources when they matter and not put them out a turn sooner.
Yeah.
And that's really the strength of the player.
We see the Artisan for the Mew, the Mysterious Tail Mew, after we see the Goldango take a knockout onto that Screamtail. The clock is ticking a little bit sooner than the previous game here for Koichi. Going to have to start setting up the board a little bit faster, but does still have a good board to work with, does still have a couple resources that are very powerful for sure, including that reversal energy. Doesn't have to take a knockout this turn necessarily, can still give up one more prize, but would like to start attacking next turn for sure.
And that's one of the things, right? You go, well, what am I bringing out, right? Am I going to bring out this this Corellia that'll allow me to get more Corellias onto the bench, right? While also having these Raltses to be able to bring up the, while also being able to rare candy up into Gardevoir. Like, you're in this unique situation when you play Gardevoir. You're like, I want to keep my refinement as long as possible. I don't want to evolve it unless I super need to.
Yeah, I think we might have to see some evolutions next turn. I don't know. I'm curious to see if Koichi will try and go for the knockout next turn, or if they will try to just sack one more Pokemon and go for the game plan of taking 2 prizes turn after turn after turn when his opponent is at 3. We'll have to wait and see. It kind of depends on the draws, of course, as well. As we see the coin bonus coming from Goldango, I think without this ability, it's a very powerful one for sure, and without it, I don't think Goldango would see nearly as much play as it does now. Having that draw built in, just like Kirlia does, I think is what keeps this deck viable.
And I feel like it's definitely required, right? With how many cards you have to discard, how many numbers you have to hit. If this card definitely did not have draw, you'd be, like you said, it wouldn't be viable. Like, there's no way that you could do it. It reminds me of, like, you know, the Entei V, the Raikou V, but just even better.
Yep.
Right? And for 260 HP, stage 1, it better be better.
And we do see actually getting double value out of that coin bonus thanks to the inclusion of Switch in the deck list for Vinny. We get coin bonus for 2, switch into the other Goldango coin bonus for 2 yet again into a Boss's Orders Honor Refinement Kirlia, only having to discard 1 energy and disrupting the setup just a little bit here for Koichi. Still has access to Iono and 1 refinement. Let's see if he chooses to go for a knockout this turn, but I think the Psychic Energy onto the active Mew indicates that maybe we're just going to chill out this turn and go for back-to-back knockouts the following couple turns.
And this hand is, like, super cool, right? Going into grabbing, like, the Gardevoir EX and the Gardevoir off the Iono. That definitely, you know, lets you set up and kind of just say, look, you know, what am I really bringing out here? What am I doing? How do I get myself into a more favorable position?
Yeah, I think, like you were saying, you don't want to put that Gardevoir EX down too early. If you're a newer player looking to pick up this Gardevoir deck, that is one of the big mistakes that you can make in this meta. You kind of only want to play it if you are using the ability that turn. In this case, it depends on how many energies Koichi has access to in this card, I think. I don't think they have enough to take the knockout given that they already attached for turn, but maybe they do if they're thinking about rare candying.
And this is always the downside of attaching, right? Because of the fact that the reversal energy is in hand, and there would have been the energy there.
Yes.
But it's no longer there. You know, you would have had the knockout with the reversal energy, but, like, you know, you can't predict it.
Yeah.
But you gotta just wait in your head. You gotta say, what am I gonna do here? What's the best play?
It feels bad that Koichi basically drew into the perfect cards you could have asked for off of that Iono, because now if you had not attached that Psychic Energy to the Mew, you could just take a knockout here. But I think Koichi made the correct play, of course, for sure, because even if you aren't taking the knockout this turn, you still have a very clear win condition. So it doesn't make sense to take that unneeded risk in this case. And I like this play as well. Just Artisan for Jirachi, a card that's pretty much useless in this matchup normally, but you're going to get some value out of it just by having it be fodder and saving on to your Mew as a resource for next turn.
And, you know, as always, I would say something on the lines of, you know, Koichi's in a very back-footed situation here. We don't know if Koichi is going to be able to step up to the plate and really recover. But every time I say that, Koichi surprises me. Every time I say that about almost all of these fantastic players in the late-night EU tournaments, they step up to the plate, they surprise me, they get the plays that I never saw, or they get the things that I've never seen. This is why, you know, these tournaments are fantastic. You get to see all these awesome players that you would never see outside of in the NA sphere. It's
really neat that Vinny's basically going to go down to 3 prizes, and it and it does seem like he is winning the prize trade by a lot, but I actually do think with the lack of Scizor, with the lack of single prizer options, and also no hand disruption, not to mention, in Vinny's deck, I actually think Koichi is heavily favored from this position still, even being down 3 prizes. You just have to knock out 2 Goldingos back to back. Sorry, 3 Goldingos back to back to back. And then you should be able to win the game. The only way that can get disrupted is if Vinny can get a huge knockout on a Gardevoir EX. That will change the prize trade, will change the prize race, and put Goldingo in a position where they can close out the game before Gardevoir can. So it'll come down to these Ionos for sure, if the Ionos can stick or not.
You know, I one time played in a league challenge where I was playing Charizard, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was playing against Lost Box, and I Iono'd my opponent 4 times in a row. And my opponent goes, you know, after searching for all those cards, putting a whole bunch of stuff in the Lost Zone, and then I would Iono them, and then I would Iono and Iono and Iono. And my opponent goes, well, I couldn't win. I just kept getting Iono'd. And my response was, yeah, what else was I supposed to do? Iono's very strong when you have a ton of cards in your hand.
Yep, Iono is very, very powerful against decks like Lost Box for sure. Okay, we will probably see a knockout coming through finally from the side of Koichi, getting the second Shining Arcana, basically setting up the board perfectly to take knockouts over and over again. It just kind of depends if Vinny can get that huge Goldango knockout onto Gardevoir EX at some point in the next couple turns.
And there's almost a world where you consider putting... I mean, I know I had said this before, but there's a world where you consider putting Cape on Gardevoir EX, right? Because they're at 3 prizes already.
I don't think you
know,
can.
Oh, can Cape not go on EXs? That makes sense.
Yeah, I believe Luxurious Cape cannot be put onto Rulebox Pokemon.
Oh, well, that would explain it.
It would be cool. It would be a very cool play, though, for sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, new cards, these things happen, right?
Yes. Yeah, the Luxurious Cape sitting in the hand there, just kind of taunting us a little bit that it's not super useful in this case. You don't really want to put it on your single prizers, and you can't put it on your 2 prizers. So in this case, you're just going to have to kind of Iono and hope. And I think... now that I think about it, I do think Vinny can get there. Just kind of has to come down to this Revo Room. If you can get that energy to use... I don't even know what the ability is called, to be honest. Let me check. The Revo Room has an ability called Rumbling Engine. Rumbling Engine. A little bit different from Industrious Incisors. You get to discard it. You have to discard an energy card to use the ability, unlike Bibarel. But instead of drawing up to 5, you get to draw up to 6. So there's definitely benefits for sure. Pros and cons. You can't use it all the time, but you get to thin out your hand and draw an extra card, which can result in basically drawing 2 extra cards in some situations. It'll come down to if Iono can get you that energy to activate that ability.
And that's one of those issues when playing this, right? You just go, look, you know, I have to Iono them down to 3. I have to hope that they don't draw energy or some sort of energy recovery. But at the same time, while they're doing that, you know, are they going to have enough to knock out this Gardevoir EX?
Yep.
It's the hardest part here, right? And you got to make sure, because like if we look at Vinny's list, I'm pretty sure Vinny's only playing 12 Metal Energy. So, you know, we got to see how much are in discard, right? On top of everything else.
You do get to coin bonus to see a couple more if you don't have that energy to use that Rumbling Engine, but you might not be able to draw enough cards for the Gardevoir knockout. And something that is interesting, though, is that Vinny only has 2 prizers in play currently. So even if they're not able to find the Gardevoir EX knockout in the following 2 turns, could stall 1 extra turn by not evolving up any EXs and just forcing Gardevoir to take a 1 prize knockout. I don't know how viable that will be if they're able to maybe Screamtail Avery down your Gimmighoul so you can't follow it up, but we'll see if that ends up being the play for Vinny, which it might have to be if he's not able to find the knockout soon.
Right, and that's the problem with not playing something like Scizor, right?
Yes.
Because you're not playing Scizor, you're kind of stuck in the situation that if your Gimmighoul gets taken out and you're, just everything kind of like gets whittled down and whatnot. You don't have a one prize attacker to just try to stall with.
So we are passed on over to Vinny's turn after taking a knockout with that brainwave. 4 to 3 prizes right now. Coin bonus coming through. Not the rumbling engine yet, so probably doesn't have the energy to use that ability just yet. Will we get a knockout onto the Gardevoir EX, or will we just settle for a knockout on the baby Gardevoir and hope for the Gardevoir EX knockout the following turn? That could definitely be an option. Iono in the hand already for Koichi. Ready to go. You just kind of want to keep hitting your opponent with Iono after Iono after Iono, given that your Gardevoir EX is just a liability at this point. See the Vessel coming through. 2 Metal Energy into the hand for Vinny. Can get a knockout pretty easily onto this baby Gardevoir now. Actually going to evolve up that second Goldango. So that option that we were talking about before of stalling with a one prizer, a little bit less possible now because your opponent can thwart it with something like a counter catcher or a boss. But in this case, we see Vinny just going for basically the draw power of evolving it so you can draw 1 extra card off that Rumbling Engine, switching into the Goldango for an additional card off the coin bonus. 7 cards in hand now. Hasn't played supported yet, I don't think, so could potentially get the Gust here. Let's see what he knocks out. Concealed cards, discarding Metal Energy. What supporter is it for Vinny? He does play 3 copies of Boss's Orders, but it's not going to be Boss's Orders. It's just going to be an Arven for that superior energy retrieval. Prepping the hand in advance and hoping that your opponent doesn't have a way to disrupt it, but we do know that Koichi does, so might get a little bit difficult next turn.
And the worst part is that, you know, prepping all these hands and getting all this ready, right? You're putting all that energy on the bottom of the deck, right? So you're saying, look, you know, your previous resources that you used, you know, all those urns are probably gone. They're not in a good spot. You're now able to just say, hey, look, you know, good luck seeing those energies.
Yeah, I think I don't exactly remember how many earthen vessels are available to Vinny, but the resources are getting pretty low. Those Metal Energy are going to go straight back into the deck, and I guess you don't mind seeing them thanks to the combination of Rumbling Engine and Greninja. So if they do get shuffled in, put in the bottom, and then they get shuffled up by some ability or some effect like a level ball or a mysterious tail or something. Not too bad, but the Iono is gonna hurt for sure, going down to 2 cards. Oh, and actually we're going to see a Screamtail play potentially, because we see Counter Catcher bringing up Revavroom instead into Iono.
And this is one of the coolest parts of the list, right? Where you're just like, hey, look, I'm going to take advantage of Screamtail to kind of hit something that it shouldn't hit. And we even get that cape combo that we were talking about earlier too.
Oh, cape coming down onto Screamtail. We have seen from Vinny 2 switch played at least. I at least remember 2 switch being played, but maybe the 3rd is in the discard already, and Vinny only plays 3. So if that's the case, if all 3 are gone here for Koichi, this pretty much seals up the game, because Vinny would have no way of getting this Revavroom out of the active, and you can just take knockouts on 2 Gaming Ghouls back to back.
And not just that, but a switch, like drawing a switch may not even be the strongest card that you could draw, right? Think about it. If you don't draw those energies, you know, you're kind of stuck anyway to draw up.
Here in this case, yes, you would want to draw an energy to use that Rumbling Engine, and then you would want to hit a switch, because then you could knock out the Screamtail for game, right? Because of that cape.
Right.
But I think seeing Koichi go for this play might indicate that all 3 switch are gone. I think maybe he would only make this play if that was the case.
Right.
We see the power of Counter Catcher coming through. Counter Catcher plus Screamtail, knocking out a Goldango EX, going down to 2 prizes, and almost checkmating your opponent. Depends if Vinny has access to any more switch. I'm not sure if he does. You could also Manaphy here to stall out 1 more turn. That could be an option if he has access to that. We're going to see right now 3 switch gone. That's exactly why Koichi made that play.
Oh my gosh.
So it has to be Manaphy this turn, or else you just lose on the spot.
Yeah, and that's one of the weaknesses of these engine decks with stuff like Revavroom, right? Revavroom requires 2 energies to get out of the active. You know, without those switches, you have to take a turn off to get it out. You have to take almost 2 turns off to get it out of the active, right? Depending if you don't have an energy attached to, to your Goldengo.
Yeah, I think the switch makes a lot of sense in this deck because you want to get that additional value out of those coin bonuses, but they're all gone. It's too late in the game. They've all been used, and we just see a pass from Vinian. And I think that means Koichi is going to move on to our finals, unless we see a misclick or something here.
I think that's just a show off, right? Koichi's just showing off that they had the boss's orders, which, without the Manaphy, with the Manaphy there, it doesn't matter. But,
yes.
Sometimes you want to just show your opponent that you have it, that it was your game either way, even if you drew the perfect card.
Yep. Makes a lot of sense. Even the Manaphy, the only way to stop the checkmate from happening wouldn't have mattered because of that boss's orders available to Koichi. And 2-0. This Gardevoir deck just taking names left and right. Moving on to the finals. Super, super strong.
I'm so excited to see this go up. I'm kind of interested to see, looking at the other matchups, right? Let's see what the other matchups are. So the other matchup is Giratina Lost Zone Box versus Mew Genesect. Either way, I think that we're going to see this... it looks like we're going to get Koichi versus Mew Genesect.
Yeah.
This is going to be, 2 titans of the format coming to, duke it out one last time, right?
The more things change, the more things stay the same. As we see DTE Mew facing down Gardevoir EX. While these players set up, let's take a little bit of a break, a quick 2-minute break. I think they're almost ready to go, adding each other. But we'll be right back, chat, and we'll see you in just a few. Chat, welcome back to the finals of our EU late night. Koichi versus Takumi, I believe 2 Japanese players dominating yet again here today. Koichi with that Gardevoir deck we've been following all of top 8 versus Takumi's DTE Mew. This matchup is one that our viewers should be familiar with if you have been playing the format for a little bit. It's a matchup that has existed basically since Gardevoir EX came out. What do you think about this matchup, Voiddyn? Are there any interesting tech cards that makes the matchup any different than what you would expect?
I'm excited to see how Screamtail impacts this matchup. Right. Screamtail hitting for that huge amount of damage with the cape coming in, being able to pull out everything. I actually think Mew's at the disadvantage because Counter Catcher's in the format, and Counter Catcher being able to pull up those Genesects is fantastic.
There's a lot of interesting interactions between these two decks because Koichi on one hand plays with 3 Avery, right? And Mew hates that card. It's really annoying for Mew to deal with because you want to be able to keep drawing cards under Iono pressure, and Avery means that you basically can't draw as many cards as you'd like, as we see the grabber come through. That being said, though, there is 3 Path in Takumi's DTE Mew deck, which is annoying for Koichi's Gardevoir deck because they basically cut workers for Avery's, right? There's only 3 stadiums, no other stadium outs. So Path could stick a lot more strongly than it normally would, as we see Takumi Waito King not getting the start that they want, emoting, unfortunately. No VIP pass, no way to thin out the hand to draw more cards off that Genesect, unfortunately.
And that's the brick you hate to see when you're playing Mew EX. I've played both of these decks on ladder constantly. I've played both of these decks at local cups. The worst thing you can get when you're playing Mew EX is not starting off strong, not getting ways to discard cards out of your hand. You know, even if you have to get rid of the tablets early just to activate the Genesects, anything you can to just get yourself set up, you got to do it.
We do see the judge now being played from DTE Mew, but because it is DTE Mew and not Fusion, we know for a fact that there will be no attack this turn. There will be no knockout because there were no Mew Vs in play last turn to evolve up into the Mew VMAX to be able to take a knockout, to be able to attack. So in this case, Koichi is going to basically have an extra turn than he normally would be to set up the board, to get going, and to have Pokemon to respond to whatever Takumi can throw at him. So
and well, even though...
Go ahead.
Sorry.
You can go.
Oh, sorry, you were cutting out a little bit on my end. I apologize.
No, you're good.
So, you know, and that's like the strength and weakness of DTE Mew, right? You get such a resilient attacker. You get to attack as soon as the Mew EX is, the Mew VMAX is brought up, right? You're just kind of all set, right? And, you know, the deck is very resilient. The deck is very consistent, but it might just be a little bit too slow, maybe? I say maybe because I'm not 100% sure here, but you know, hopefully this Iono puts Koichi into a better situation.
I think in a vacuum, DTE Mew is a little bit too slow in and of itself, but that's kind of why all the disruption is thrown into the deck. The 3 Paths, of course, can pose a huge problem for Gardevoir EX because Path turns off the way you attach energy, the way you accelerate energy. So it's going to come down to that, and we see Koichi have to make an interesting choice between going for Avery or going for Iono to draw more cards, and the play to go for Iono paying off hugely, being able to find that Mirage Step, and now has basically a perfect board of 4 Kirlias and 2 Ralts.
And this is the scary part, right? Like, both opponents are basically all set up, right? Now you're going to basically see, you know, when it comes down to it, which deck is just going to be able to use their engine better? Which one's going to be able to have the better attacker, right? Whenever you say Mew DTE, Mew VMAX DTE versus Gardevoir EX, you know, which one's the better deck? You know, you say in a perfect world, right? This is that perfect world.
I think in this case, if things keep going perfectly for both players, if Gardevoir gets to draw exactly what they want at exactly the right time, I think Gardevoir will win the game, just because it's so good to have the prize race being swung in your favor, using stuff like Screamtail to knock out maybe a bench Mew V without even giving up 2 prizes, or using, Baby Gardevoir to knock out Mew V Max, stuff like that. But we have to remember there are 3 path. There is that Box of Disasters on that bench Mew V, and there is no Lost Vacuum. There are only 3 Stadium Bumps. There's not that many outs to the Path to the Peak. And of course, Mew doesn't love Path to the Peak when it paths itself, but this DTE Mew deck is built to be able to handle it, is built to be able to disrupt your opponent as much as possible. So it's going to come down to Path, basically.
I really like the addition of Grabber in the list as well. This is a card that I had not seen existed until I looked at this list, right? Being able to play an item that is so strong at being able to pull something into play, and also just to be able to play and not have to have, you could just go down a card if you need to, is huge.
Yeah, Grabber has basically came out in 151, but is only seen play in the Mew VMAX, DTE Mew VMAX specifically. And it basically has been used in conjunction with Luxray in the past to potentially win against Charizard. You would judge Luxray, V, Grabber. Not really super for this matchup, but even in the matches where it's not for, like you were saying, it's a card that you can just play immediately on the spot for basically no downside, and you get to draw an extra card off of your Genesect. So if you're going to be using that Genesect ability anyways, sometimes it's just as good as Trekking Shoes would have been in some situations. Maybe even better if you actually get a hit off of it.
Yeah, one thing that I was very worried about with the Mew VMAX, showing the confidence in the Mew VMAX player, right, is the using Lost Vacuum to get rid of the DTE in hand. Going down 1 DTE if you haven't seen another in hand, right? If you haven't at least...
You do know that there are 2 on board right now, and thanks to Open Deck List, you do know that your opponent isn't playing anything tricky to get around these DTEs. So once you have 2 DTEs in play, theoretically you don't need any more, right? Because if your opponent knocks out 2 Mew VMAXs, you lose the game regardless. So I think that makes sense, but it does open up some lines for like counter catcher, stall out Genesect, because DTE, even though you don't need it for any additional attacks, could be used as just a retreat option. So that's something that could come into play later on in the game, as we see the teleportation burst into the Mew VMAX, into the boss, into the other Mew VMAX, into knockout with Max Miracle. And that teleportation burst for 10 damage that we saw last turn from Koichi, actually really relevant, because if you look at Box of Disasters, it doesn't activate if this Mew VMAX has any damage on it before it gets knocked out. It has to be a clean 1-hit knockout, and now that Box of Disasters is basically taken out for free unless we see some sort of Psychic Leap shenanigans or something like that. But super relevant, matters a lot. 4 prizes to 6 now, but we've seen Koichi come back from this time and time again, so let's see if he can do it yet again.
And this is like the Gardevoir special that we've been seeing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Gardevoir comes back from behind in what seems like almost a hopeless situation. Gardevoir seems to just be using Mew, like using the Curlia's ability Refinement to just basically draw yourself back into the game. It plays all these pieces it needs to get back in.
It does, and the hand is pretty good. The board state is pretty good. 3 Curlias, 1 Ralts. The Mirage Sep didn't get KO'd like you were hoping. We saw last turn Waito getting the boss onto a Refinement Curlia, but you're still okay with that so far. You really want to see an Avery, though, I think more than anything this turn. Not quite getting there after these refinements. Still only has Iono.
Right, and that's the thing, right? As you were saying before, Avery would be huge here, being able to knock off stuff off the bench and basically just say, hey, look, you're going to draw less cards. I'm going to make you either bench something else or, just overall, like it's just a win-win no matter what you do.
Ultra Ball coming through. We could see Dig for it still potentially. We could get Shining Arcana Gardevoir and still try and find it, or something like that Greninja. You probably don't want to Greninja away that reversal energy, though. It's too valuable of a resource. But it's still possible. It's still doable off of the Shining Arcana. We can still see it, potentially.
And the coolest thing is that, this being finals, right, we get to see the best players tonight of these decks come up and just, swing it out, make the optimal plays, there is no huge misplays we're going to see here. These are titans of their deck, right? They're really, they really know how to pilot these guys. So
We see the evolved the Gardevoir EX happening, and then we see Iono before Shining Arcana. So we're gonna go for the knockout here onto this Mew VMAX. I don't know how many energy are in the discard pile right now, but Ultra Ball double Psychic. So if Koichi wasn't there yet, he certainly is getting super close. How many energy are in there? Let's see. Psychic Embrace, thinking about it. Can we get the knockout?
I think right now that Koichi's just figuring out, do I have enough damage, right? Am I going to be able to get the knockout on the Mew VMAX? Because if I can't get the knockout on the Mew VMAX, I'm not putting those damage counters on there for no reason.
Only one energy in the deck, I think, indicates that he for sure is going to be able to take the huge knockout onto Mew VMAX. The 2 Avery in hand now, just a little bit too late because we already played Iono for turn, but still in a wonderful position because you're only 1 knockout away from winning the game now. Of course, path can still pose an issue, but you're able to get through the first one just fine, and you still have 2 outs left in deck, so you basically have a couple turns now remaining to set up the final play and win the game off of it.
And not just that, but the Koichi also has refinements, right? Just drawing a ton of cards. If there's an answer in the deck, Koichi's going to try to find it, right? So, I think maybe you just put yourself in this position where you're like, look, I'm going to try my best here. I'm going to, if there's a path coming down, so be it. We'll figure that out when we get there.
Yeah, totally. And I think this is not only the correct play, but also a really strong one where I think Koichi is now suddenly favored in this game, probably more likely to win it than not. But the way we've seen Koichi come back from games time and time again, it's not out of the ordinary for Mew it's not out of the ordinary for Mew to do the same. We'll just have to wait and see if the path Iono comes through or path Roxanne or anything like that.
I do super like the play that Koichi did there, where Koichi attached onto the Mew, knowing that a path may come down next turn, and if that happens, Mew may get stuck in the active. I'm sorry, Mew may get stuck in the active. So Mew has an energy on it now to retreat if Gardevoir gets knocked out. If there is a path, there is no bad Pokemon to put in the active.
Something that could come up potentially is some sort of boss stall play for Mew as well. If you can boss up Gardevoir EX and do enough damage to it where it can't Psychic Embrace to itself, could potentially be a route to winning this game. I'm not sure how many tablets
Especially with
are
all
down.
that energy in the discard.
Yes, exactly. But we do see also Super Rod right now, so maybe that's not an option anymore for Waito. I think he just wants to dig for path at this point after that judge came through.
Right, and Koichi's sitting here with that strong Collapse Stadium in hand, ready to get rid of that path if it does come down. No hesitation, probably that Collapse Stadium will come down right away.
Path to the peak. Unfortunately for our Mew VMAX player, Koichi does have the Stadium Bump already ready to go. Still needs Gardevoir, Baby Gardevoir though, Shining Arcana, to win this game. And actually, Takumi with the Mew VMAX deck chooses to take a knockout with Psychic Leap. So you can't win the game just yet. Not this turn, but we see the Scream Tail. So if they choose to do so, we can actually bump the path and then Scream Tail knock out a Mew V if that's the action here that they want to take, or just Shining Arcana knockout if they draw into that.
And that's like, you one way or another you're gonna get a decent knockout here on Guardy's side, and that's like the resilience of the Gardevoir deck, right? You have so many different options.
You are going to get a knockout, and you are going to go down to 1 prize. The problem is there will be 1 path remaining in your opponent's deck, but they also will only have access to 3 basic Pokemon on their bench, so can they even find the last path? That I'm not sure about.
I really like the Avery play here because it kind of skill checks your opponent, right? It says, are you going to get rid of your Mewtwo? Because if you get rid of your Mewtwo, I knock out your other Mewtwo and you're stuck, right? So you play I think no matter what, you play the Avery there just in case your opponent decides that they're going to get rid of the Mew.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. It also just draws you cards, which is nice. But here, you can knock out a Mew. 1 more path out left in the deck, actually in the hand for Koichi right now. So will we see the hand disruption plus path play? It's going to be a tall order, but that's the win condition that Takumi has to play for here.
I wonder if there's a world where Koichi Mysterious Tales here gets, finds whatever is needed to get the Shining Arcana. Unfortunately not, but
yeah,
then just, attack.
It's curious that he didn't bench Screamtail, because I would have... No, I guess Screamtail only does 160, right? So unfortunately, I guess Screamtail wouldn't be able to knock out either. So no knockout coming through, just going to have to sacrifice a Ralt, and we're in a back and forth section of the game right now.
Oh, you could go for the...
Thinking about using the Miracle Force. Thinking about taking the knockout that way.
I think you have to risk it, right? And then you have the ability to reversal energy, get the knockout again. Right? So, if Gardevoir gets KO'd here, then that goes down to 2 energy on the... or that goes down to 1 prize card. And then you just Shining Arcana knockout with the reversal energy? Well, oh no, you wouldn't be able to do that because you wouldn't be able to Psychic Embrace.
Yeah.
Okay, never mind. I take back what I said.
This is a very interesting play. I think there's lots of pros and cons to it. I think one pro for sure is that you're putting your Pokemon down to only 3... your opponent down to only 3 fusion Pokemon in play. So you're really limiting the effectiveness of that fusion strike system. They're not going to be able to draw that many cards, so that means they might not even be able to find the attack next turn. But they do have 6 cards in hand. We'll see. It also kind of depends on how many damage modifiers your opponent has access to. I don't really remember how many tablets are played, but 1 going down so far. Cramomatic, your opponent thinning the hand so aggressively right now.
And that's really the advantage of knocking out the fusion strike Pokemon, right? Stopping the ability to draw up to huge amounts of cards.
Fusion strike system for 1. I mean, yeah, normally huge amounts of cards, but in this case, not so much. We might not even see the double turbo come down, in which case the game would look really good. Switch card, retreat just to thin out the hand a little bit. Maybe fusion strike system for 1 more card, and normally the situation you were talking about where they got rid of 1 double turbo, if you play the normal game plan, it doesn't really come up if you have 2 double turbos already, but had to shuffle 1 back in for the Psychic Leap, so doesn't have 1 in hand right now, and actually has to vacuum away the last patch of the peak, so that will no longer be an option. Just has to hope for the double turbo now to just put some damage on this board, but nope, not gonna get it. Back on over to Gardevoir EX, and I think this game is looking really good right now.
Yeah, I believe that if I'm if I'm going here and I'm searching, what am I searching for? I have the Shining Arcana in my hand. Oh, it doesn't even matter. We have the boss's orders.
Huge play, and we're gonna see the concession, and Koichi sweeping through our top 8 bracket, 2-0, 2-0, and now 1-0 on the set at match point against DTE Mew.
And that's always, this is one of those that, I don't think any has a super clear advantage. I think, both decks have things that really prey on each other, and just being able to get those quick knockouts and, whoever sets up first, I think is just how this matchup goes, like so many others.
1-0 on the day. Can Koichi complete the clean sweep? So close with this awesome Screamtail Gardevoir deck.
Now I wonder if we're gonna get more of an aggressive gameplay from the Mew EX deck, or sorry, the Mew VMAX deck. I hate that there's a Mew EX in the format because I'm gonna keep calling it Mew EX every single time by accident. With the Mew VMAX, right? I wonder if we're gonna get more of an aggressive play that's gonna try to, man, I need to pull up that list. I wonder how many. 1 second. Yeah, so there's only 2 bosses orders, so I was thinking that maybe we would see a more aggressive play from Takumi, but maybe with only 2 bosses orders, you don't really have it.
I think part of the problem was that they had such a poor start turn 1 and was not able to put a Mew V down. So that gave Gardevoir just a little bit too much time to set up, I believe.
Right, and if you give these stage 2 decks more than a turn to set up, you're inviting in such an awful experience.
Especially with Mirage Step, right? I think Mirage Step is basically smooths over any inconsistencies that the deck has as long as you have access to it. Previously, the matchup before Mirage Step was popular in Gardevoir came down to Mew lost seeding a bunch of your Kirlias and winning the game that way, but now even if Takumi played Velocity, which he doesn't, that's not really a great option because your opponent will have access to 4 Kirlias, 2 Ralts, a couple Candies, And I think that means that unless these paths stick, which they didn't last game, the advantage has to go towards the Gardevoir player. It's going to come down to path yet again. Will we see the answer to the path as easily as we saw it last game?
Now, if you're Takumi, right, and your opponent doesn't set up, they have no basic Pokemon, you have the option to draw, but you have a ton of great cards in your hand, right? You have your setup with your Mew Vs, your Genesects. Do you just decide not to draw the extra card because you want to dump out your hand and draw as many from that?
No,
is there a world where you can do that?
I think, actually, if for any Azul fans in the chat, Azul was talking about this on his stream earlier today. There are potential hands where that's theoretically possible, but it's very, very unlikely. The only case is if you are going to research. The only case I can think of, at least, is if you're going to research and you don't want to draw into anything that you would have to discard, and you know for sure no matter what you draw you're going to research anyways. I don't think this applies to the Mew deck, because even if you draw a card that you can't thin from your hand before you Genesect, that card you would have drawn into with the Genesect anyways, if that makes sense. So I think in this case you would just draw as many as you can.
Yeah, and that's always a see, that's always the hardest part when you set up these lists and you go, well, do I draw an extra card? Do I do all this stuff? And with Stall coming back into the format, maybe I would be more akin to not draw extra cards.
Right. I think
especially because you have those.
Yeah, I think in Stall and Control matchups that equation changes significantly. I think in this matchup specifically, though, I think you would always draw the extra cards.
Yeah, because good cards are cards, right? You get an extra card, that's an extra thing you can set up. That might be an extra thing you can dump. I don't think it would be a liability. Especially because it's your turn 1 draw.
Right. We do see our Mew VMAX player with a significantly better setup than last game. Unfortunately, had to use that Forest Steel Stone already to get that VIP pass. Sometimes Mew just has to do that. Unfortunate, but even though it's unfortunate, it does mean that we will probably see a turn 2 attack, putting on the timer just a little bit sooner than our previous match, which could make all the difference in the world.
Right, and as we were talking about before, the Mew VMAX deck wants to attack right away out the gate as soon as it can, no matter what.
VIP pass